Hello, this is National Chess Master All Rats. I'm here at chess.com analyzing a game submitted by Nate23 against Master Breaker. It was played at a time control of 30 minutes for the game plus a 15-second increment. That's a pretty good time control. It's still not the ideal time control to play for simulating real tournament games, but it's a lot better than 15-0 or 30-0. Okay, so let's have a look and see what happens. Okay. And we quickly go into an Indian defense. And this is good. It's a good opening. Black will cede the bishop pair often and seeks to get active play for his pieces and development. And there's quite a lot to be said about this opening, well beyond the scope of this video. I'll just make some suggestions on the line that was played. Bishop d2, by the way, it's slow. Black should equalize comfortably against it, and that's what he does. I'll suggest a few alternative lines that I might employ if I was playing black and if I was playing white, because I've played both sides of this opening, and black is opting for the quick fianchetto on the queen side. Now that's a wonderful bishop. Look at that diagonal. And queen c2, it's a common square for the queen to go to in the Indian, but it's almost asking for it in some respects. One strategy that white can employ that black needs to face and will face sometime is f3. And the idea basically is that e4 is such a useful square for black in this opening. White is just going to take it away. Now black has recourses against this, of course. Mostly he'll just continue his development while white is making pawn moves and then challenge the center either with a maneuver of d6 and e5 later, or a d5 directly, and c5 can come in at some point too. And all this is well beyond the scope of this short video. Okay, so at some point black needs to play knight e4, and I'll show you the way I will play it. And even bishop e4 is decent, but it just gets a tempo on the queen, and the bishop's kind of misplaced on e4. But here, this is the point where I would play something different. Knight e5 is just screaming to be played, and there's no reason at this point to shut the light squared bishop in behind the pawn. Okay, the follow-up here is black will eventually play f5 and further support that knight on that square, and then follow up with d6, knight d7, and knight d to f6. Okay, just illustrate it with arrows here. d6, knight bd7, and knight f6, and e4 is black's square. He says, "You're not getting there. I'm keeping it." And if white wants him out, he has to maneuver his knight and play f3. And I've tried that strategy before as white too, with success. But I basically won because I was the better player, not because it's a superior plan. See, interesting thing about these openings, they're basically equal. White might maintain his slight advantage in some of them, but without a mistake, without two weaknesses, the game's a draw. Okay, so let's move forward. But again, d5, it just shuts off the diagonal. A much better approach is, since black doesn't have a dark squared defender, often what black will do in the Indian is put his pawns on black squares to take squares away from the enemy bishop. Now theoretically, one drawback with that strategy is if black puts all his pawns on dark squares and the light squared bishops are exchanged, then theoretically white has a better ending because all those pawns are targets. Well, so it seems like a mistake to put them on the opposite color of your bishop, but that's part of the whole key here. The key is you keep your bishop. You don't trade it off. And if you're white, you try to trade it off, right? So that's the strategy. Because if you put all your pawns on white, then okay, you might have trouble trading off the white squared bishop, and then of course your knight's going to be great, but you might have trouble trading off your white squared bishop, and the other white squared bishop can get very active on you, and it can do better because your bishop is kind of entombed behind a bunch of pawns. So you want the bishop with maneuverability. That's why you put pawns on the dark squares. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so d5 and e3. White needs to complete his development. And now the knight e4 maneuver comes in. But if there's an exchange on e4, not saying white will do it, I think it's better to be taking back with the f pawn. Because why? Well, it opens up the f file for the black rook. That's the whole difference. And black just has far more options to attack on the f file if that's his goal, and it'll stop white from maybe wanting to capture on e4 because he'll open up that file. And okay, and here the game takes this extremely interesting turn, and it's something that you see played on these lower levels, and we'll discuss it here in a moment. Black has calculated this out, and what white sees, the first thing is white sees, oh look, I have his Zwischenzug, I can get a pawn with check, and then I'll take the knight, and that's exactly what he does. Now I'm assuming that white saw the follow-up. This is something that you see a lot at this rating level. A lot of players, and lower, a lot of players, for instance, they will go for positions where they give up 2 minor pieces on f7 for a rook, just to destroy the black kingside castle position. But that's good for black because he has 2 minors for the rook. And here, this is just a simple trap that we're all familiar with. Look up Fischer versus Spassky versus Fischer, Game 1 in Iceland World Championship match, 72. Fischer got his bishop trapped down there. He figured he could get it out, and he couldn't. He still missed drawing opportunities later, but whoops. Anyways, it happens. But here, the bishop is lost. But white says, well, gee, I've got attacking chances. I can give up. I'm giving up the bishop for 3 pawns, and that's supposed to be equal. A piece is worth 3 pawns, right? Well, that's true. But what about the resulting position? And I think white was just a little too eager here, because this is not really a good strategy to go into if you have the opportunity, and it's a strategy to allow if you can. So I think black was wise in his judgment to allow this, and I'll explain it when the position clarifies. Okay, so now here it is. White has collected his 3 pawns for the piece, and white now has 8 pawns. Black has 5. White has 2 connected pass pawns, and the black king is exposed. So a lower rated player could look at this and say, well, gee, this is great. And even if I can't find anything, I can always draw by repetition, queen h6, queen g6, back and forth. Well, first off, the drawback with that is there's several reasons. Number one, it's black's move. White's threatening to draw if he gives up, but it's black's move. He can defend that. Now, how do we evaluate the rest of the position? It's true that from pawn count chess, the material is even, but as a general rule, not always, as a general rule, the piece is worth more than 3 pawns in the long run. Yeah, I know they're supposed to be equal, but it depends on the position. It really does. In this case, although white has 3 pawns for the piece, the 3 pawns are not in action. They're all the pawns are back where they started. We're talking about f2, g2, and h2. Theoretically, white can eventually force some pass pawns here. He can take on d5 eventually and advance his center pawns up and eventually get either a 2-0 or maybe even a 3-0. But there's a long time for those moves to come. And black has plenty of time to make moves in the meantime. And what he's going to do is mobilize his army. Now, let's talk development for a moment. Black has 2 pieces developed, his rook on f8 and his bishop on b7. The queen, knight, and rook are still sitting at home, but white's not in much better shape. He's got a knight and a queen developed. The king isn't castled, and most importantly, not that the rooks are not connected, it's the rooks don't really have an entry point, and they're not going to be joining this battle right away. So what's white's plan here? Obviously, he'd like to give a checkmate, but it's black's move, and black can defend that. And once it'll clarify once black makes his defense. I think you probably see the logical move. Black to play and play the best move. Stop the video. Okay, you've restarted it. Since you know there's a threat of a perpetual check, and black should be playing this for a win, and e6 is hanging, we can cover both those things in one move with queen f6. So I hope you found that move. That was the move that instinct told me go ahead and play. So now if white trades queens, black will complete his development and work on those pawns, keeping them restrained, and seek to activate his rooks on the king side and hold those pawns back. And it's an interesting struggle. It could go either way, but the fact that the white pawns are not advanced basically is going to give black the better chances. Plus, black could always grab the pawn on c4 if white's not careful, and white might have to exchange to activate that bishop. And if the bishop can double white's pawns, they get very weak in a hurry. So white retreats the queen with check with a tempo, and black runs out of there. And white really doesn't have enough here to attack. He could try knight g5, which threatens an epaulette mate, but black has resources to defend that. Just queen h6 will do. So let's see what happens. He checks here, and this just actually drives the black king out of danger. You know, you're getting some checks, but the king is finding some good places to run to. Unless I'm missing something. Let's see. King e8. Obviously he can't go to e7 because white plays knight g6 check and wins an exchange or quality if you're European, and white has a whole lot of pawns for giving up two pieces for the rook, so then white's probably better. Okay, so now white does one right thing. He gets one pawn going, and he gets rid of the threats on f2. But really, was that wise? But what are his alternatives? To get the h1 rook developed, the only way it's really going to have any kind of influence is to play h4. But why can't play h4 right here? Because f2 is hanging. So one interesting move is to play rook a2 here. The idea of rook a2 is that you're guarding f2, although black may be able to play d takes c4, and if knight takes c4, there's an annoying bishop d5, but white can just let that pawn on c4 go, and then start advancing his h-pawn as quickly as he possibly can, because white needs to do something or he's going to get ground out here. Okay, so rook a2, d takes c4, then h4, and hold on for dear life. Plan is to, but then, like I say, black gets development too. He'll be playing knight d7, offering to trade pieces and get his other rook into play. Okay, so let's move on. f4. It's the right idea. It's an advancing pawn, but that pawn's not really a candidate for becoming a pass pawn, especially in this position. It's going to take a while for white to get. He really probably can't make that a pass pawn. He's just left with his two pass pawns on their original squares where they don't need to be. They need to be in play. So black does a smart thing. He opens up the diagonal for his bishop, and white retakes. Although it might have been better just to let that sit, give it up, shove the h-pawn. But anyway, black does the wise thing, develops. And you know, I think white just doesn't know what to do here. Queen h5 check really doesn't make much sense, although it does keep the king, you know, give him a chance to go to e7, where he can play. Well, he can't play knight e5 anymore because black will take it off. But it gives black a chance to play king d8, and the rooks are not connected. So he's hoping for that. But king e7, and now white defends the pawn. Well, okay, it's fine to defend the pawn, but you've got to be able to run the pawn. It's got to get to g4 in a hurry here. But the drawback with doing it this way is that h2 now hangs, and essentially the game is over. What white needed to do at some point here was if he wasn't going to shove his h-pawn, was castle, or as I was saying, rook a2. But now, since black's rooks are connected, he's going to win a pawn on h2. And when he does that, the game is essentially over. Now all the black pieces spring to life. White can't shove his g-pawn now. It's pinned. And so he just throws the knight in there, but anytime black can take it off. But he gives a check first. Now, the king should probably make a beeline for the queen side. He's just kind of walking into trouble here. But at the same time, black's going to pile up on g2. And if black wins that other pawn, game over. Okay, so black liquidates. And white really can't take with his f-pawn because rook f8 check will be a killer. So, now, at first I was looking at that, I said, well, it's kind of an impulsive move, but the idea is to play bishop a6 and get the bishop activated. But the bishop was already activated, so rook g8 was a reasonable move, and just leave the bishop sit there. It wasn't... White's not getting at it in any way, shape, or form. And then the bishop, if it has to, it can always, if it has to, go back to c8, and with a rook on g8, all the white entry points into the black camp are covered. The rook will cover d8, the bishop will cover d7, and the pawn on c7 will cover d6. And the pawn on e6 is busy covering d5, so white really has no way to penetrate. Unless queen c4 attacking c7, but black should be okay with that. He can find resources, even. But anyway, that's something for black to look at on his own. I will just confuse you if I talk about everything. White might find some play there with queen c4. I don't know. But anyway, white develops that rook, and black just develops his last piece. And what else can white do? He's giving up protection of g2. This has a threat of a queen check, and then another queen check, and maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe white wins. I don't know. But it's black's move, and he gives a check, and the white king is kind of embarrassed. He only has one legal move, and that's just going to allow a discovery. So he gives up the rook. And keeps this threat of a check on d7 alive, but black finds a good move again, black to play and do the best he can, and he checks here. And at this stage, white realized that he's in trouble and he's going to lose this, so he resigned. Let's just look at the continuation. Obviously, if you put the rook back on g1, black takes with the g8 rook and wins the rook on d1 as well, so the king has to go to e2. And then black just picks up this rook with check. Now what's white going to do? He's in serious trouble here. If king d3, black picks up the rook on d1, and gosh, there's got to be a mate in here somewhere, I would think. If anything, we can just take the rook on d1, and we're two rooks up, and the king is still in danger, even though he takes on g2. He's probably going to get checkmated. So it was a good game by black. My recommendation is don't give up your bishop for 3 pawns like that. In some positions you can look at it and work out. If you have more pieces in the game that can help the attack, and if you follow up with shoving your pawns, then you have a chance. Okay, I thank everybody for their time. I apologize that I missed a day yesterday. A lot of things came up. Just one today. I'll get back on this tomorrow, I promise. Thanks for your time again. Take care.